So I founded Fable to create the world's best experience for discovering, reading, and discussing stories with friends all in service of mental wellness. And as part of that mission, I'm proud to bring together two authors and leaders who inspire me for a one-of-a-kind discussion today. First, Adam Grant. Adam, as many of you know, is a professor and organizational psychologist. He's a leading expert on how we can find motivation and meaning and live a more generous and creative life. He's here to talk about his new book, which I have read. Great book, by the way. Think Again. If you haven't read it, highly recommend it. And Adam curated an amazing folio on Fable called How to Look for Creativity in Crisis. I actually read a book in his folio called A Whole New Mind by Daniel Pink, which I would not have otherwise read had it not been for Adam's recommendation. And we've collaborated with Adam to create discussions and summary prompts for the books that he's recommended. I'm also here to introduce Luvvie Ajayi Jones, extreme fan of hers, and she's here today. She's another award-winning author, speaker, podcast host, who combines comedy, media, and justice in her work. She's the author of a new book, wait for it, I love this title, Professional Troublemaker, the Fear Fighter Manual. Luvvie curated a folio also on Fable called Books to Set You Free, sharing 3 books, all of which are on my list to read next. And there are great books out there. If you haven't read, again, I highly recommend these books to you. So first, Adam, I want to start with you and start with your book. You show us, as you talk about things in this book, how cognitive blind spots affect us on a daily basis. And in driver's training, we learn how to deal with visual blind spots through mirrors and sensors. How can we deal with cognitive blind spots? Could you say a little bit more about that?
Well, let me start, Padma, by saying how delighted I am to be the token white man in this conversation.
Yes.
I think we need more of that, don't we?
Yes.
So cognitive blind spots, where to start? I think my all-time favorite bias is the I'm not biased bias, which is the tendency that so many of us have to see the flaws in other people's thinking, but to assume that we're immune to it. And I think the first step toward recognizing your own biases is actually to know that you have them in the first place, right? So once you realize that, like all people, you have motivations that cloud your judgment, you have preferences that in many ways color your thinking and skew it, it's a lot easier then to catch yourself. Most of us still catch ourselves in hindsight rather than in the moment. And I think one of the great joys for me of being an organizational psychologist is my job gives me a vocabulary to describe all the stupid things that I did yesterday. But I think that the language is a huge part, right? To be able to name the biases you face. I think, knowing that there's this bias blind spot, right, which is the technical term for the I'm not biased bias, is a starting point. And then I can say, okay, what biases do I fall victim to most often? For me, one of the biggest challenges is a simple bias. It's desirability bias. When I want to see the world a certain way, I have a tendency to seek out information that confirms my worldview and then discount or dismiss or argue against information that doesn't fit. And knowing that, right, whenever I form an opinion or make a decision, I can say, okay, what do I really want here? And how might that be altering my judgment? And I think that kind of work is hard, but it's probably worth it in the end.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Luvvie, can you tell us a little bit more about, you talk about how professional troublemaker is a special way of living. Tell us how a professional troublemaker challenges their own blind spots.
Yeah, I think a professional troublemaker is somebody who is constantly looking to grow and knowing that they will say the hard things and do the hard things, but hard things will be said right back to them. Like, you're somebody who welcomes to be challenged because you understand that you also have to disrupt your own life. And that means you don't just tolerate when people are saying, hey, this thing should be fixed. It's like you're saying, where can we fix it? You go looking for the disruption. You go looking for the change that actually needs to happen. And I think that's a big piece of this. And I think that's why professional troublemakers are so necessary, because when you're constantly looking for ways to grow, you will. right? You will find those ways. You will find, the blind spots, because if you already are saying that I want the people around me to look for them for me and make sure, they're as corrected as possible, people will bring it to you and say, let's fix this piece. And I think it does actually allow you to shift your opinions, grow, kind of rethink your ideas, rethink your stances. And sometimes maybe they will be affirmed, and sometimes you might have to change them.
And in Adam, I think in Think Again, you contrast two types of people: the armchair quarterback, and I think I know what that is, right? Having read that book, maybe you want to explain that a little bit to our audience here, and the imposter. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you came up with these two types, what they are, and why do you think they're important?
Well, let's be clear. All of us are both of these characters at different moments in our life. What I was interested in at the outset was confidence, and how we think that confidence should go hand in hand with competence. But in so many moments in all of our lives, they diverge. And so the armchair quarterback is a situation where your confidence far exceeds your competence. If you've ever been to a Super Bowl party, it's the football fan who knows the least about the game, who's screaming at the coach for calling the wrong plays. And everybody else is sort of laughing at that person, realizing they don't know what they don't know. The imposter is the opposite, right? It's the person whose competence actually exceeds their confidence, where other people look at them and they say, Luvvie, you're brilliant, you're hilarious. And meanwhile, in Luvvie's head, she's like, wait, am I really? I'm not so sure. I mean, she actually knows finally, but she didn't used to, right? Which I know is something we're going to talk about. And I just was fascinated by the fact that we can slip in and out of one or the other, depending on what situation we're in, what challenge we have in front of us, and trying to figure out what is the ideal level of confidence to have. Should we be a little bit overconfident? Should we be a little underconfident? Or should we actually have confidence that perfectly matches our competence? And I had to rethink my own stance on that once I got the data.
Yeah, so Luvvie, tell us, I think you talk about how imposter syndrome struck you and you had to get past that. You mentioned that you were about to give a talk at a TED Women conference in 2017. And you often tell the story about how you nearly got derailed giving that talk, but you found your strength. Tell us more about that, because I think that's something we all go through, right? Oftentimes we find in the moment we're called upon to do something, and all along we prepare for it and then we get scared. Tell us how you got through it, and how do you overcome that fear that's inside you?
Yeah, I mean, so when I was offered to do my TED Talk and I turned it down twice, it was because I actually didn't think I was ready. And, a lot of times we think imposter syndrome makes us think we can't do it. But I do think for everybody, it might look really different. For me, it looked like, oh, you're not ready for this yet. Maybe in a year, you'll be ready to take that stage. And I did basically almost let it convince me to not take that stage. But it was a friend who said, like, no. You have the credentials, you have the experience. It might be 3 weeks before TED, but they're asking you to do this because they believe that you can do it. So you actually don't have the reason to turn it down. Like, if your reason to turn it down is that you're afraid of bombing, do you usually bomb? So I do think imposter syndrome in those moments, bringing it back to the logical. It's less of the rah, you got this, and more of the, no, actually you do have this because you have this degree, you have this experience, you've done this 1,000 times. So I think what that TED talk really taught me, because I stepped on that stage and killed it and did the talk like I'd been doing that particular talk for 1,000 days, even though that was the first time I gave it. It really taught me that, yeah, some imposter syndrome absolutely lies to us and has us thinking that we aren't ready, we're not qualified, we're not good for whatever the opportunity is, whatever the thing is. And I think the other thing to consider when we feel imposter syndrome is, like, if we don't believe in ourselves, we can believe in somebody else's belief in us. So it's like, okay, if you're like, I don't know if I could do this, but you have 4 people, for example, saying, no, you got this, then borrow from some of their belief on you and use that to push you forward.
I have a question about that.
Yeah, me too. Go ahead, Adam.
Well, no, Luvvie, it's so interesting to me that there's this paradox that on the one hand, you're saying, okay, I lack confidence because I'm not sure I belong on this TED stage, or maybe I'm going to screw up and embarrass myself. There's also a tremendous amount of confidence in saying, I'm going to trust my own opinion of myself over all these people who are watching me and seeing how good I am. How do you land in a place where you're doubting yourself, but also trusting your own instinct over other people's instincts?
You know, that's interesting. Because in that moment, I thought my instincts were telling me, don't take the stage, but that was really my anxiety. Right. So there are times when you might think your instincts are the ones talking to you, but it's really not, and I think that's when you then call in the community to now boost you up, for the times when you're not trusting your own instinct, go to somebody that you trust and trust theirs, and I think that's the difference. And that is the place to kind of be in, is once you do that, it gives you something else to stand on. Even if your own legs are shaky, hold on to somebody else's. And I think that's the power of using the people around you and of trusting the people around you. Because if there are people who in the past have proven that their judgment is sound, in the moments when you are like, I don't really trust my own judgment, use theirs. And that, because they've already put in all this currency from past decisions that they've helped you with, or just how they even live their own lives.
That's so helpful.
That's
helpful.
Super helpful, Luvvie. I want to build on that. How do you identify those people? Do you have like people that you continue to build in your network as those trusted advisors that you go to because we all face doubt, doesn't matter how accomplished we are, right? Like at some point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We do. I call them my life's board of directors. And there are people who over the years I've built relationship with, who I've seen and have proven in different ways that they care about me, that they are the professional troublemakers in my life. And they're not the people who just will tell me yes, just for the sake of me hearing it. Yeah. So, in a moment of deep crisis, or even in a moment of just confusion, I'll go to them and see how they even handle it. And if their counsel feels right, if their counsel feels like from a place of good space, good energy, good intention, and also like just wise. There are people who you can go to who you will tell them a terrible idea and they'll go, oh no, that's great, do that. You do it, it fails spectacularly, and you go, how come you actually didn't let me know this part? So I'll even give you an example. Somebody sent me a copy of their book and I read it and I found some like big red flags. So I go to them and I say, hey, let's have a conversation about this thing. Here's what I see in this book that might not go well, okay? And the person on the phone tells me, holy smokes, I've sent this book to 5 people. Why have they not pulled this out? And I said, maybe they were afraid to tell you. But what I did in that moment, and what I told her, she was like, oh my God, I see it now. I don't understand why I hadn't seen it and why other people had not queued it up for me. What I did in that moment was prove to her that I can be trusted, even in the moments when I'm disagreeing. Even in the moments when I'm like, I don't know if she's going to like this. I'm not sure she's going to take it on, but I'm going to do my part as somebody who's considered her community. There are other people in our lives who have showed up in that way for us, who will say, not sure if you want to go that route. Here's what I suggest for you. All is not lost. And I think those people, you watch them over a few years, sometimes not even a few years. You might even figure this out in a few months because you go to them and they always come to you with integrity, with honesty, no matter if they have to tell you something that feels hard.
Yeah, that's great. I love that phrase you use, life's board of advisors, right?
Yeah.
That's such a great phrase. I think we all need that. I know I was 17. I grew up in India and I went to engineering school when I was 17, and it was like 5 women in a class of 250. And when I got there, I called my dad and said, I want to come home. I don't think I can do this. And he told me something that struck with me. I mean, at that time, now I think back, he was probably one of those advisors I had, right? He was my dad. And he said, no, you've chosen your path. Now it's up to you to make your journey interesting. You already are there and you're in IIT, which is like a very hardcore engineering school. You got in, you wanted to do this, you're there. Now you have to make that journey interesting. And so, I mean, if it had not been for that advice, I would have quit and gone back home. And, I think I just thank him so much to this day for that great advice. I think it's always like when you're in doubt, call those people that will give you that encouragement. That's great. So Adam, in Think Again, you count a few different ways that imposter syndrome actually you think helps us, right? And so can you explain a little bit more about how this disastrous feeling of anxiety and doubt can actually motivate us?
Well, I think the disastrous kind is pretty hard to get any benefit out of, right? But we had a doctoral student, Basima Tufik, who's now an MIT professor, and she just said, "Why do we have to make imposter thoughts into a syndrome? Like it's some kind of chronic, debilitating disease? What if we just think about it in terms of the ordinary doubts that all of us have? Of, I don't know if I'm ready to get on that TED stage, or I don't know if I'm going to fall flat on my face, or maybe this is a new challenge that I'm not quite prepared for." And those doubts are very different from walking around with this deep-seated chronic sense, I'm a fraud, I've never earned a success in my life, everyone's going to find out. Right?
Yeah.
That's kind of rare. That's the syndrome. What Basima did was she studied how often people have the regular doubts. She looked at investment professionals and medical professionals, and she found that there were no consistent performance costs of having those doubts more often. So when those imposter thoughts cropped up, investment professionals didn't do worse at their jobs, medical professionals didn't do worse at their jobs, and in many cases they did better. The investment professionals actually made better decisions. The medical professionals listened more carefully to their patients and showed more compassion toward them. And I think as Luvvie was previewing for us earlier, when those imposter thoughts crop up, what seems to happen is people say, I'm not sure that I'm quite qualified yet, so I've got to work harder. And I'm not sure that I know everything I need to know yet, so I've got to work smarter and learn more from the people around me. And that means you stay open to rethinking the way that things have always been done, which is kind of a liberating place to be. But I think there's a giant disclaimer that goes on all of this, which is that reaction is easier if you're a white man. Because the data say, and I can tell you from my own lived experience, which is probably different from both of yours, that we have the luxury of just walking around and other people assuming that we're competent. And if you have to prove your competence as a woman, a person of color, or both day in, day out, it's a lot easier for those chronic or for those doubts to become chronic, for them to get internalized. And that I think makes it a little bit harder to shake the syndrome, so to speak. What do you both make of that?
I think that's very true. I think the way I interpret it, what you've said is sometimes you can make doubt to be a motivator for better preparation. That's true. But I think what I face, and I'm sure Luvvie would agree with this, in a field where if you're a minority and you're constantly questioned and your ability, you feel like you're constantly proving yourself, after a while, fatigue sets in. And it's easy to either get to be how do you say, dismissive about like, okay, they're going to doubt me anyway, so why bother, and check out. I've seen people do that and give up, or sometimes you just get resentful that, you constantly have to be pushing, and it can be very, very tiresome and weigh you down. And so I think then it becomes like this burden. And Luvvie, I don't know if you agree with that, where you constantly feel like you're fighting to get heard, you're fighting hard to get your ideas heard, you're fighting to justify why you belong in that room or at that table. All these things become so difficult as barriers, right, to overcome. Luvvie, no.
Yeah, no, I think that's real. Like it really becomes a syndrome when it becomes like a lifelong battle, that even when you don't doubt yourself and others around you are having you overprove your value, then you start internalizing some of it and saying, wait, is there something? But when it's everybody else and not you in those moments. And that's hard, right? And I think for women, for Black women, we have to do the double work to not internalize the constant need to overprove why we know what we know. Like even casually, we have to do it, and I think for us, the work becomes really harder. It becomes much harder, because even if you are really confident, right, some of those times you'll go, I wish I didn't have to do this again, and I think that's something that I hope women see, that like you're part of a grand community that's doing this exact same work. And I think, which is why there probably is a need for some overconfidence with women, because the opposite is where we've lived in for so long, right? Compensating for all the times when we've been told we're not enough, or we can't do this thing, or with our degree, somebody will try to explain something that we actually know better than anybody else. And we'll still have to be like, I actually know more than that about you, but you're arguing me down. So I think we could use some overconfidence. We need some bravado. We need some like extra oomph to it. So when people try to bring trash our way, we go, I don't receive it. So I try to surround myself with some, not even overconfident, because I don't even think it's an overconfidence, but a lot of my friends are really like verbally confident. Yeah. Right? Where we are not apologetic about saying like, no, like I'm actually amazing at the things that I think I'm good at. Like I'm an amazing writer. I'm an amazing speaker, because I know I've done the work. I have the experience. I kill when I hit the stage, and not being shy about saying it, because I think the opposite of imposter syndrome at this point is a bit of bravado. And I do think we need it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think just being bold and like not being, I love the word unapologetic, being ambitious and letting your ambition show, there's nothing wrong with that, right? I think women of color especially need to do more of that. So yeah, speaking of confidence, I think there's a subtle difference between confidence, arrogance, humility. Both of you talk in your books about the power of humility, but at the same time, Luvvie, you talk a lot about how self-deprecation can become something that's harmful. And so can you share some light? I guess first I'll go to you, Luvvie, and then come to you, Adam. You also talk about, Adam, confident humility. So Luvvie, first for you, how can women avoid the trap of self-deprecation without becoming arrogant?
So I think we are accused of arrogance way too easily. Way too easily. People are super quick to say people are arrogant when they see unwavering confidence, especially in women. Like, you know, we are told we're arrogant if we say, no, I'm really good at this. And somebody goes, wow, she's so arrogant because I walked on stage confident and gave you a fact because I've proven that I'm really good at this. So I think for us, we need to be less worried about arrogance. If the worst thing you can say about me is that I think really highly of myself, you know what? Then think I'm arrogant. Hey, I'll be the arrogant one who comes in real excellent, but pay me my arrogant dollars, right? So I think for us, humility is really like, I think we should redefine humility. It's not you constantly reducing what you're good at or, you know, making jokes on your own behalf. It's not that. That's not humility. That for me is self-deprecation that can easily become self-sacrifice. It's not worth it. And if you are constantly joking about yourself, people will not take you as serious at what you are good at. You know, unless you're a comic. If you're a comic, you can be self-deprecating for a living because that's what you get paid for. But if you work anywhere, I don't want the designer who's laughing about their skills. I need the designer who goes, I'm going to show up and kill. Okay. So I think humility is knowing that you are great, knowing you're good, knowing you're valuable, but also knowing that there are certain systems and people and opportunities in your life that got you there. You know, so I am good at what I'm good at. I'm good as a writer. I'm good as a speaker. But what allowed me to get good is my mom's sacrifice when she came to the US. You know, are the many English teachers that I had who I didn't realize were crafting my voice and making sure I knew grammar, sentence structure, knew how I could put it all together so I can break those rules whenever I felt like it. It's my grandmother who I watched her bravado, you know, growing up. It's the many people and friends and mentors and colleagues and people who I just deeply respect who speak my name up in rooms and say, hey, Luvvie should be here because she's really good at this. So I didn't become great by myself. I didn't become good by myself. And I think that's the humility, is giving credit to our journey, to the people who've helped us, to the privilege that we walk with, right? And knowing that we got to be great from a series of those things and our hard work. So that's the humility that we need.
Yeah, that's great. And Adam, you talked about, in your book, you talk about confident humility. I often, when I speak, talk about bold humility. It's sort of like distinguishing between being courageous and bold. I wonder, is confident humility the same thing, or is that something different?
It might be. I don't know. Tell me more about bold humility. I'm curious to learn.
Yeah, for me, bold humility. Like, look, I'm a big believer that people have to be lifelong learners, right? Like, no matter how much you know, there's still a lot you don't know. We all don't know. And I learn a lot but from people like you, your own experiences, what you write about, the research you do, the perspectives you bring forward. And I'm thirsty for that. So you shouldn't be afraid to ask questions and saying, I don't know, especially if you're a person that's in power. Like I've led big teams. Often I've had in my previous jobs 26,000 people working for me. And there's this notion in business that if you're an executive, you should know all the answers. And quite the opposite is true. Oftentimes you don't know all the answers and you are there to ask the right question. So that's what I mean by bold humility. It's sort of like, being courageous, but being humble enough to say, I don't know, what do you think? And, taking input from your team. To me, confident humility is somewhat similar, but different as I was reading in your book. So I wanted to have more of a perspective on how does confident humility come across? How do we use it in our daily lives?
Yeah, I do think it's very similar. I think when I think about confident humility, I'm thinking about being secure enough in your own ego that you can admit what you don't know and also acknowledge when you were wrong. Right? That you don't walk around trying to convince people that the mistakes you made didn't happen, right? Or the weaknesses you have are actually strengths. It's fun to watch Michael Scott do that on The Office, right? And say like, yes, I have weaknesses. I work too hard and I care too much. Right. The rest of us, we should be as clear about our weaknesses as Luvvie was saying we should be about our strengths. And just as she's saying, hey, you know what? If you're a Black woman, you should have the permission and the opportunity to own your excellence. How about those of us who are white men have the moral obligation to own our failures and our mediocrities?
Come on, Adam, you better go ahead and say that. Yes.
I mean, that would balance things out a little bit, right?
Yes.
So, and
yes.
that's what confident humility is. Like it's being comfortable admitting all of your limitations. And so I guess, Padma, in that sense, maybe it includes the boldness, but it also captures the sense that, hey, you know what? I might be aware that there are things I'm good at. I'm also clear there are things I am really bad at.
Uh-huh.
That's actually, Adam, that's such a good freaking point that I want to double down on, because part of the reason why a lot of people have the imposter syndrome of I'm not good enough, and part of the damage about it is that when you finally do overcome it, you think you're supposed to show up with full knowledge all the time because you've had some of your experience weaponized against you. So we all actually get to win when we all have the freedom to say, yes, I won because of this, but here's where I need to fix it. A lot of people are afraid to admit the weaknesses and have that vulnerability because they are afraid of being weaponized against them. I think there's a lot of power in saying I don't know and being able to say, all right, so what do I need to know more now? But that whole idea of, white men actually saying I failed, that's freaking massive, because the world tends to give white men a lot of credit for a lot of work that other people have done. And then a lot of people who are on margins get no credit for the work they've done. So yes, that will absolutely create some sort of balance in some of the power structures and why they're all so shifted right now.
Great. Okay, I'm going to go to audience questions in a couple of minutes. So if you're in our audience, please, you can type in a question in the Q&A and I'm picking a couple of them up. I will go to the first one now, and I think this is more of a comment, but I'll read this out. Women's lives are ascribed and defined to this or not enough of that, oftentimes. So create your own script. I think, Luvvie, you said that. That's awesome. Thank you. Is a comment from the audience. So maybe we can build a little bit more on that from both of your ideas. How does one create our own script for what we want to be in life? Luvvie, are you muted?
Whoops. Okay, sorry. I think I created my own script because the world, like the life that I live right now, the career that I have did not exist 15 years ago in this way. And I fought it for a long time because I didn't have that script. You know, being a writer who wasn't a novelist and who wasn't a journalist, I felt like because there was no version of the writer like me, I was the person who was writing essays about the world as she saw it, her thoughts. And I was like, nah, that's not being a writer. Writers are more serious. So it was because I had no script. I didn't call myself a writer for such a long time.
Mm.
But I realized in the moments when we don't see the example that we need, we might be the ones who are purposed to create and be those examples. So I ultimately became the example that I didn't have. So I do think when a script is lacking, maybe you're supposed to write it. You know, the book that you want to read, maybe you're supposed to write it. I think about that Toni Morrison quote, and I quoted that in Professional Troublemaker. Like, if there is a book that you want to see that does not exist, you write it.
Yeah.
So that's actually how I approach my work, is I try to create the things and the scripts and the manuals that I need. So because if I know if I need it, other people will need it too.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. I don't know if I can add anything more to that, Adam.
Well, I don't have anything to add to that. You nailed it. I'll just say, maybe as something complimentary, one of the mistakes that I made repeatedly throughout my career path was I would find somebody whose work I really admired, and then I would put them up on a pedestal. Then I would meet them and be completely let down. Like, oh no, I have to find a new role model now because this person is not who I thought they were. And then, you know, I just kind of cycle through role models and not really feel like I had someone to follow. And I think what I learned after making that mistake a bunch of times was I should stop looking up to people and start looking up to specific virtues. So what I ended up doing was I made a list of work that I loved. And sometimes, you know, there were multiple books or multiple articles by the same person, but often it was like, nope, one hit wonder over here, one hit wonder over there. And I wanted to look at the patterns and say, okay, what is the virtue underlying several of these things that I love? And I realized that, you know, there were some common values there, right? That the people I tended to look up to, they tended to have a very high standard of excellence. They tended to be voraciously curious, lifelong learners. They tended to lead lives of generosity. And they, you know, in more cases than not, had the kind of humility, the confident humility or the bold humility that we've been talking about. And I thought, okay, well, like, let me find exemplars of each of those qualities and not expect one person to define them all. And that made it a little easier to kind of mix and match with the different pieces and say, okay, how do I try to put these things together?
Great. Actually, next question, Adam, is for you. This question is specifically for Adam. Do you have any advice on circumventing imposter syndrome on the journey to becoming a psychologist and working in the academia?
Oh, yeah. I think the easy advice on that is to say that everyone is an imposter, right? No one is as good as their best work. And everybody has days where they look at the past work they created and they're like, uh-oh, maybe I'm never going to be able to pull that off again. And knowing that, it humanizes all the people in the field. It also reminds you that you're going to have days like that. And that's just part of the process. In fact, it's part of what leads you to question your own work and do some of the kind of internal troublemaking and disrupting that Luvvie was talking about earlier, which I think is so valuable. It's really easy to get typecast in this field and say, okay, I'm known for a particular idea or a particular way of looking at the world. And one of the best ways to make a contribution is to actually challenge your own assumptions and disagree with your own conclusions. I think, you know, in the early days, I really struggled with this. I remember submitting, I think it was my first 6 papers, reject. And some of them were pretty harsh. I remember there was one reviewer who wrote that the authors should reconsider going back to whatever their old day job was.
Aww.
I was like, I didn't even have a real day job. Like, I have nothing to go back to.
Yikes.
This is it. Yeah, that was painful. But it kind of lit a fire under me. And Padma, I was thinking about this earlier when you were talking about doubt, because there are moments when being doubted by others or underestimated by others can really be a source of fuel. I have a colleague, Samir Nur Mohammed, who studies the underdog motivation. And he finds that when somebody questions you in an area where they're not that credible, you don't know me, you don't know my capabilities, you don't know my drive, that can actually motivate you to work harder and ultimately do better. And so I actually pictured that reviewer, like reviewer C, in my head, right? And every single sentence that I wrote for the next few months was, I'm going to prove that person wrong. I'm going to show that person I can do it. And one day they're going to tell me they reviewed one of my garbage papers. I'm going to be like, thank you, because your complete lack of belief in me is part of the reason that I made it here. Still hasn't happened, but it's something to hope for.
That's such a great story.
Yes.
Awesome story.
Yes.
Okay, here's a question for both of you. What would the panelists recommend the best way is to overcome imposter syndrome? We've covered some of that in the panel discussion, but if you were to pick like one tip maybe for our listeners.
Surround yourself by people you trust, people who are also really brave and not afraid of it. Because I'm telling you, I think the antidote to imposter syndrome is a community that deeply believes in you. Like, because time and time again, even if you don't believe in yourself, the community pushing you to do bigger things will lead to you doing bigger things because they won't let you say no. Like if you tell your best friend, oh, I'm not going to ask for this raise, and your best friend says, yes, you are. I'm gonna need you to go ahead and do that. You'll remember her voice in the meeting when you're like, I have to go back to her until I didn't ask for this raise. Fine, I guess I'm gonna do it. And you'll be more likely to do it scared. I think the power of community can really drive us. And for this particular thing, imposter syndrome, peer pressure can help you overcome it. Like we talk about peer pressure as if it's a bad thing. We can use it to make each other do big things, and audacious things. So just surround yourself with dope people, like have great mentors, and don't be shy about asking these people questions when you are confused. Don't be shy about being like, I need your help. So yeah,
awesome.
Get good people.
Oh, there's so many great questions. Luvvie, I'm doing a time check. You have 2 more minutes, 5 more minutes?
2 more minutes, yes, because I'm hosting a Jenny Lawson book talk.
Another question for you, and then Adam, I have several questions for you if you can stay on for a couple more minutes after. This question's for Luvvie. How did imposter syndrome change your perspective before and after your first book became a New York Times bestseller? Were you surprised at the book's success? Great question.
I wasn't surprised by the book's success, but I was taken aback by it. I knew, so when the book hit the Times list, the week it came out, I was wildly taken aback. Not because I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it happened. It almost was, I can't believe it happened, but I know I earned it, because I put so much work into it. And I was like, this was my goal, but I'm going to basically leave everything on the table and do my best. So when it hit the Times list, I was never like, oh my God, this is nuts. How did it happen? I knew that my work, the people who showed up for me, who I was like, hey, I need your help to do this thing because it will change publishing, especially for people who look like me. And people said yes. So when it hit that list, I was like, oh my God. And so when book 2 hit number 3, now that shocked me because I was like, holy smokes, this category was nuts. I thought I was going to drop on the list somewhere. I didn't think I was going to be top 5. That part shocked me. But again, I was like, I worked really hard. So I wasn't hit with I don't know how this happened. I knew exactly how it happened. So I also do think the other part of imposter syndrome is just keep working hard. Let it drive you to work hard. That's, similar to what Adam just said, like imposter syndrome comes in real handy because it will push you if you let it. I'll go, you know what? I want to get this goal. I will at least work really hard for it. So if I make it, I'm not wondering, oh my God, how did this thing happen? I know how it happened.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. Before you drop off, I just want to summarize some of the key messages I heard you say, and hopefully I got them right. Always surround yourself, create a board of directors for your life, and go to the people that will have confidence in you when you're feeling anxiety and doubt. That's the first thing I heard. The second thing I heard is don't let self-deprecation become a handicap. Don't let that become your main agenda, I guess, right? Use bravado a little bit more. Women especially need that more of. That's the second key message that I heard from you, Luvvie, today. And the last thing which you just said is always make sure you're working harder to overcome those doubts, which is also something that Adam said. Make sure the toughest critic in your life is a motivator for you to do better, and keep working hard at it. Thank you so much for your insights. We look for many more New York Times bestsellers and lovely pieces of advice from you. Appreciate your time. And Adam, you're not off the hook yet. I have several.
Yes, and always good to share stage with Adam. I'm looking forward to me and Adam sharing a lot of stages together. We work very well together, Adam.
I agree. I just have one rule. I never want to have to speak after you.
That's good you're speaking together. That's perfect.
All right, have a good night, y'all.
Okay, let me see you. So Adam, the next question for you is, how do you approach being open-minded about something you vehemently disagree with or might be offended by? I tend to get very emotional during these kind of discussions and interested in both of our takes on this. And there's a compliment saying we were all awesome.
Nice. Well, welcome to the club, right? It's the club of being human. We all get emotional when we disagree passionately and strongly with somebody else's view, especially if it threatens one of our values or our core beliefs. I have not always done this well. And by not always, I mean almost always failed to do this well at all. I think one of the things that I learned through writing Think Again, and now through all the feedback from people who know me and are like, wait, that thing you wrote about, you should actually try doing that occasionally, is I need to think about putting on the scientist hat more when I meet people who disagree with me. And when I say, think like a scientist, I don't mean that you need a microscope or a telescope or even a white lab coat, although I would enjoy it if more people walked around looking like Bill Nye, the science guy. It'd be kind of fun. What I mean is scientists, at least when you're trained to think like a scientist, you're taught to value humility over pride and curiosity over conviction. And that means when you meet someone who just vehemently disagrees with you, what an interesting specimen. Like, this person is the closest thing I could find on Earth to an alien, right? Like, this is a completely different species. How in the world does this person exist? How could they possibly think this way? I must find out more, right? And that's the stance that I want to have. When I've remembered to do it, what I've done initially is I've actually just expressed surprise. And I've said, you know what, honestly, I've never come across views like this before. They're very unfamiliar to me. And so if it's okay with you, I would love to ask you some questions to understand better. And it's, I was a little worried that they were going to feel interrogated or judged. And it was the opposite. They were flattered. They're like, oh, wow, well, nobody really in a long time has expressed a sincere interest in understanding, how I got to these beliefs and who I am. And it ended up being a much more nuanced and open-minded conversation than I expected. How about you, Padma?
I think for me, I try to separate things that I disagree with and that are fundamentally against my principles, right? I think there are certain things that I value a lot and I care very deeply about. And if somebody is challenging those things, then I politely say, well, we should just agree to disagree. I respect their view and I try not to get emotional, but like you said, sometimes it's hard, but I try to put it in the context of they're welcome to their belief. It's just very different from mine. And, I try to be respectful of it. But there are other things that I put in the category of, okay, open for debate. In that case, I would approach it with, I don't necessarily, maybe my starting position is not to agree with them. I'd like to explore more. And I think there, like you said, it's more of the scientific approach of let's gather some data. Why do you feel this way? Why do I feel the way I feel? And compare notes. And, if my position is wrong, then I'm completely happy to change my position. It often happens in engineering when you're problem solving, you take one approach, may not be the right approach. But yeah, I think I try to separate those two things and have maybe slightly different approach for each of those. There's so many questions coming in here.
Do you want to try to take a few lightning style?
Yeah, you want to do that? And so I will go to this one. Adam,
I'm ready.
Curious to hear your thoughts on how the shift to remote work over the past year has impacted imposter syndrome, manifesting in the workplace. Are there things companies can be doing right now to help their employees who are dealing with this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's happened over the past year is we don't have the eyes and ears we're used to having, right? So pre-pandemic, you make a bunch of comments in a meeting, you're not sure how they're perceived, you're starting to doubt yourself, and you walk back to your office with a couple of colleagues and you get their feedback. And it's a bit of a reality check. And there's there's not only no opportunity to do that. Can you imagine just randomly then calling one of your colleagues after a meeting? Like, they probably have another meeting scheduled in the virtual world. So I think it's gotten a lot harder for a lot of us. I think I'd love to see more leaders holding office hours, just even a couple hours a week, the way that we do, as professors, saying, hey, anybody who wants to show up, I'm available in these 2 hours every Friday. And it lowers the bar a lot, right? It's so easy to show up. It also, signals a level of accessibility that I don't think enough leaders are able to create, given all the demands on their time. So that would be one thing I think that could be helpful. What would you recommend, Padma?
I think for me, it is. I think when we go back to work, I think it's interesting to think about, will everyone come back fully to work, or is some kind of a remote work always going to be there? I like to think of it as permanently companies will go to having some flexibility in how people work. To me, building in a way to listen to people, it's sort of like maybe you're talking about open office hours. For me, I think as a leader in a company, anyway, a listening tour of some kind, where you're talking to people both in the office. I mean, it's like if everyone's in an office, it's easy, right? You walk around and you meet people in the cafeteria, at the break room, etc. When you're remote, it's harder to do. So building in some kind of listening tours remotely, I think would be a great way to do that. That would be mine. Here's another question. Isn't all confidence fake to some extent? If no one knows everything, how can one be so sure of themselves? What do you think? Is confidence fake?
I don't think so. I think we all have skills that we deep down have extraordinary faith in, right? I think we heard it from Luvvie. She knows there is not a bone in her body that questions her ability to write or speak, and rightfully so, right? She's extraordinary at both of those things. Yeah. I don't think there's any question there. I think where the question comes in is when you get into an unfamiliar task or a new situation, and then you say, okay, did the abilities that I proved over here, are they going to apply over there? And that's where a lot of people start to say, well, I have to fake it until I make it. I'm like, do you? Or can you recognize that maybe you shouldn't spend so much time worrying about your confidence? You should just do the task and then hope that as you succeed at it, that will build your confidence.
Yeah, I also tell people, that we're all good at something, right? Like it's identifying that and being confident about that versus trying to fake it all. I think, define whatever your expertise is and be confident about that, right? And that particular topic. And, it could be, as a people leader, it can be a technical topic, whatever it is. I think draw your strength and your strength of confidence from that. That's sort of how I usually approach it, and don't fake confidence about things little about, right?
Yeah.
Okay, last question, and then I'll let you go. Do you have any advice for avoiding double spiral? And the way this person defines double spiral is, I don't think I'm good enough, and this distracts me, so I don't work as hard, which makes me lose progress and reinforces the original doubt. So it's sort of like, you're not confident, you think you're not good enough, therefore you give up, and then it just kind of doubles up.
Yeah, those vicious cycles of doubt are devastating when they happen. I think there are a couple of things that seem to be helpful there. The first one is something that I will borrow from Sarah Blakely, who I think you know.
Yes.
Sarah is, I think, one of the best examples of someone who was completely unqualified for saying, look, I'm going to start this, this company Spanx, and I don't know anything about fashion or retail or running a business. I am completely unqualified. And she didn't let that stop her. She said, well, I just don't know yet, which is something that Carol Dweck and her colleagues, when they study growth mindset, that they call out consistently is there's a huge difference between I can't do this and I can't do this yet, or I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know what I'm doing yet. And so what did Sarah do? Instead of having confidence in her current knowledge and skills, she had confidence in her ability to build those knowledge and skills. She had confidence in herself as a learner. And she said, all right, I'm going to read a book on patents for dummies and teach myself how to write a patent application. And then, hopefully I'll know what I'm doing. I'm going to go drive around and visit all these mills and ask people to teach me how to make a product. And then I'll have the skills that I need. And I think that kind of confidence, that just in your ability to learn, is the easiest kind of confidence to build, because that is literally what you are as a human being. We have all been learning our whole lives, and it's something that everyone is good at. I think the other thing I would say on this, which also goes, Krista, to your question about imposter syndrome standing in the way of creative potential, is Elizabeth Gilbert has a great observation that if you look back in the history of creative genius, genius didn't used to be something that described a person. It used to be a state of mind. So you wouldn't say, Padma, you are a genius. We would say, Padma, you have a genius. That temporarily, right, the muse has shown up that day and you are able to produce something brilliant. And I think it's a great lens to get out of the imposter syndrome trap, because when you realize genius waxes and wanes, it's something that shows up for us some days and kind of lets us down other days. You see it less as something that's intrinsic to your personality or your character or your talent, and more as something that you're constantly pushing for, you're striving for, you're searching for, and trying to build and develop. And I think that it makes it much less of a fixed obstacle and much more of a malleable attribute that we can grab onto every once in a while.
Great. Awesome. Well, we are almost at time. Is there something I should have asked you that I didn't ask you?
Well, I don't know what you should have or could have asked me and you haven't told me.
Key topic, key message you want to leave us?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that I've learned from studying people who achieve great things is that they have the same doubts that all of us do, right? What differentiates them is they doubt their ideas. They don't doubt themselves. They doubt what they know today. They don't doubt their abilities tomorrow. And I think anytime you have those crushing self-doubts, when you say, can I do this? Am I good enough? It's worth remembering that the person who's answering those questions today is not going to be the same person who steps on stage tomorrow, or who writes that draft next week, or who takes on that challenge next month. And I think if you can look at it that way and say, all right, I'm just going to doubt the version of me that's showing up today, and the particular approach that I'm taking, that gives you a lot more flexibility to keep on learning.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. As always, very insightful, Adam. Key things I heard from you today is genius is a state of mind. And so, in all of us, there is a genius. And I think we always have to ask ourselves, how do we let that genius shine and not let our imposter syndrome hijack the genius that's inside us? I think that's a key takeaway for me. The second key takeaway I heard from you is when we meet someone whose opinions we don't agree with, rather than shy away from it, take a logical, scientific approach and try to understand where they're coming from and explore more deeply what the differences are. It's an amazing message. And then you talk a lot about creativity and confidence and confident humility, which is something that I love. It's often something that I talk about. How do we let confident humility encourage us to be more curious, learn more, and be broad in how we approach things. So thank you again for amazing insights. And your book is awesome, the new book. I say that with all sincerity. And if to our audience, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend that book, along with Adam's Folio and Fable, some great selections there. Thanks again for your time, and hope to be in touch and hope to chat with you again sometime.
Likewise. Thanks, Padma. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.